First is the object at the bottom. The object is what I'm denoting, what I'm referring to. Then what it calls the representamen. And the representamen is, for instance, the sound, the words I'm using to denote what I'm talking about. And the third element, which is called the interpretant. The interpretant is the psychic mental image which rises inside my mind when I am given a representamen. That is exactly what now is happening in your minds as I'm talking in reaction to what I'm saying. A three-part sign. Not only that, but at a further stage, what was the representamen becomes the object in the second part of the second drawing. What was the interpretant takes the place of a representamen, and that gives rise to a second interpretant. So it's a kind of chain reaction whereby a representamen determines, in the words of Peirce, give rise to an interpretant, the first interpretant, and then a second interpretant gives rise to another interpretant, and this ad infinitum. And I can carry on this change of places of the different parts of a sign. It's going to become clearer just in a second because I'm going to give an example. It's a very crude, very stereotyped example, but extremely effective. For Peirce, the sign is something which stands for something else. Something else being that object which is at the bottom of the drawing, for someone. It is directed towards someone else, and it creates in that someone else's mind a similar sign. And that sign is constructed from their own history of ideas. Therefore, from beginning to the last or penultimate interpretant, it's not going to be exactly the same thing. Hence, communication obviously does not really exist. So here is a very crude example of ORI. I'm talking about a code, so the code is the object. The representamen is going to be the sound codes. And the interpretant in my mind, being a chap, is going to be, for instance, a level code. But talking to a woman, the interpretant, from her own history of ideas, is going to be a very different kind of code. It's not a level code, it's a kind of fur code. So this interpretant business is very dependent upon the own individual history, the own individuality of the person in whose mind it arises. And here is another example of ORI. The object being this presentation, the representamen being what I'm actually saying, and then the interpretant, oh, that French chap is a genius, we're going to give him all kinds of credits to carry on his research. This is a very humoristic example, but it shows the flexibility of Peirce's concept of a sign, and how very much it depends upon the mind of the person the sign is addressed to. The individuality is actually conserved here. To summarize, Peirce semiotics is defined not by the elements the sign contain, but by their relationships. Therefore, in Peirce's terms, 1 plus 1 does not equal 2. We have two quantities plus the relationship between those two quantities. And for Peirce, thinking is translated or interpreted through a subsequent thinking process, and that's this business of the interpretants. Let's look now at Jacques Lacan's semiotics, and we'll see in a short while how those three semiotics can actually be merged into one, because they do correspond with one another. By the way, if you're interested, I'm the curator of a site called Lutetium.fr, where we have the audio recordings of Jacques Lacan's seminars. It's all in French, obviously, but if you're interested, you can listen to them there. And it's very different from actually reading Lacan. Listening to him is extremely different. Again, we have the traditional Saussure sign, signified above signifier. And what Lacan does is that he reverses that sign. He puts the signifier on top, and he puts the letter S in uppercase. He then puts the signifier underneath the signifier and in lowercase, because for Lacan, the signifier is much more important than the signifier. Furthermore, we see a bar which divides the S, the uppercase S and the lowercase s. And that bar for Lacan means the autonomy of the signifier and the signified, whereas for Saussure, the signified and the signified are tied together, hence the circle. There is no encapsulating circle for Lacan, there is only the signifier. Then Lacan takes the notions of metaphor and metonymy as defined by Roman Jakobson and redefines them. For him, the metaphor is a substitution of one signifier by another. And this is what I showed earlier on in the example of the two images of a sovereign, one a portrait of actual sovereign and the other a picture of a crown. And metonymy is the connection of a signifier to another signifier. And we can already see the correspondence with what Freud was calling condensation and displacement. All Lacan did was to actually translate those two notions into linguistics terms. And therefore, for Lacan, the concept of the notion of signification is extremely different from the traditional one in linguistics, the concept of meaning. For Lacan, signification is a series of interconnected signifiers. Signifier connected to signifier connected to signifier. Then, in a retroactive effect, when I stop adding signifiers to the chain, when I put what Lacan calls a point de capital, that is a knot, where I say stop, no more messing about, no more metaphor, then through this retroactive effect arises an effect of sense. Not sense, not meaning, not signification, but an effect of meaning, an effect of sense, an effect of signification. That is, Eureka, yes, I've understood. Je vous ai compris. To summarize, Lacan's concept of a sign and language, it's a system of signs or signifiers subject to metaphor and metonymy under the action of a drive, pretty much as in Freud. And two little sentences of Lacan which have caused a lot of head scratching in their days. A signifier only has meaning through its relationship with another signifier. This is pretty much what Peirce himself was saying much earlier on, in that a thought process can only be interpreted through another thought process.